Hasidasian, they mot hela världens fred. Och vi nu inte kan leva isolerade, vi är globala och vi är jättenära varandra. Om det finns någon problem i Sydasien, naturligtvis det också påverkar oss, de som vi lever i Europa och alla länderna. Och det är vårt ansvar, vi måste tänka på det här. Och det är viktigt för Sverige från början. När FN:s säkerhetsråd 1948 de beslutade det i folkomröstning. Från den tiden, den kontrolllinje eller stillståndslinje här. Med den här gränsen, det finns FN-militär. Och det är från början, från 1948, Sverige deltar. Och Sveriges militärobservatörer, de är där och de skickar rapport till FN, vad händer där? Och så andra länder, till exempel Finland, Norge, Korea, de också deltar i FN, ceasefire line. Så på ett sätt Sverige har militär del med den linjen. På andra sätt Sverige också säljer vapen till Indien och Pakistan, mest till Indien. Och jag tror ni vet, vi kanske läste när Pakistan och Indien hade mycket problem och den kardan så Pakistan och Indien hade nästan en indirekt krig i 1999 i juli och juli månad här, nästan här. Och Sveriges Bofors-kanon, de var mest vapen som diskar användade. Och det är också, jag tror, vill berätta om situationen finns där och påverkar. Så det är frågan, på en hand Sveriges militär del under FN och de ser situationen. Och andra hand vi också ser vi behöver fred. Vi vill inte ha krig. På andra hand vi också ser vapen till dem. Och det är Sveriges lag. En gång också jag skickade brev till Sveriges statsminister. Det finns i Sveriges lag. Om det finns någon krig, Sverige får inte sälja vapen på de länderna. Men även han har statistikansvar. Vissa från år till år de säljer vapen till dem. Så det är också frågetecken för oss. Och vi har så här svensk Kashmir committee, vi har information här, vi har en sida i postadress. Om ni behöver kontakta oss, om ni behöver mer information, så alla är ni välkomna. Och så en av min kompis, han är Marcus Svensson. Han är svensk student, han har varit i Kashmir, han har varit i Pakistan, Indien och Pakistans Kashmir och för 2-3 månader sedan. Och han också har dokumentärbilder och andra, kanske någon gång du ska också ordna någon seminarium och han ska också berätta situationen där. Så nu jag tror att jag vet att Farooq Suleria ska komma. Det får läsningen på engelska, men om ni har några frågor ni kan ställa.
I'm sorry, I will speak English, despite I've been to SFE. But it's no problem with SFE. I think it's Swatskalana who are not trying to learn Swedish so fast. So Swedish minister shouldn't be worried. Anyway, I think Arif has said a lot and not much left for me to say. But still, I will try to start with the history when the problem was created. And if historically we look at the Kashmir question, and for that matter, many of the problems that we have today in the subcontinent and to a large extent in South Asia, it was a product of the British imperialism. Had they not been there, I think the history or humanity would not have suffered so big tragedies that we suffered in Indian subcontinent, particularly the year 1947, when they divided India into two countries, Pakistan and India, leaving almost 1 million people dead. One of the biggest massacres and the history's largest displacement of human beings. It took place in 1947, and the year 1947 they created Kashmir problem. The problem was created because India and Pakistan, they had expansionist or colonial intentions from the beginning. Kashmir, as I've told, is one of the, or was one of the 567 states in Indian subcontinent. Can we go back? There were 567 states, or figures are a bit different, maybe 570 to 573. Different historians have different figures. These were called princely states. They were not directly occupied by the Britishers, but they were ruled by the local rajas, local kings, and they used to be a protectorate for the British imperialism or British India. At the time of division of India, the states, the princely states, their kings, they were given a right both by Congress, which was led by Mahatma Gandhi and Pandit Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, and Muslim League, which was the founding party for Pakistan, and his leader was Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Talat, maybe you can show pictures instead of taking my pictures, so that people have an idea. This was the king of Kashmir at that time. So he was given the right to decide if Kashmir want to be a part of India, a part of Pakistan, or want to be an independent country. There comes Nehru. He was the leader of Congress, which was the main party of the Indian subcontinent at that time, but later on the founding party for Indian subcontinent, and he was the first Prime Minister. Interestingly, he himself was from Kashmir. His forefathers came from Kashmir. He was upper caste and upper class Hindu Pandit. He agreed, and his party agreed to the arrangement. Jinnah, who was founder of Pakistan, and his party Muslim League, they agreed, okay, all the princely states, they have the right to become an independent country. So the Kashmiri king, he decided to be independent, and he was supported by the both big political parties in Jammu and Kashmir. The biggest party at that time, it was called National Conference, Jammu Kashmir National Conference, and its leader was Sheikh Abdullah. The other party, it was a small but bit representative of the Muslims. That was also for independent Kashmir. It was called Jammu Kashmir Muslim Conference. So the king, the big political parties, the Kashmir Assembly at that time, which was not really representative because Kashmir didn't have this universal suffrage. That means everybody didn't have right to vote, especially women didn't have right to vote. But whatever assembly it was, everybody was for a self-independent country. And actually, we became an independent country for a few months, which was not acceptable, particularly to Pakistan, because Kashmir is very, very, very important both for India and Pakistan economically. Both countries at that time and Pakistan even today, the main source of income or the economy is agriculture-based economy. And all the rivers, they come from Kashmir. They flow from Kashmir to Punjab and down up to Sindh, all through Pakistan area, which is agreeable. Beside that, it was a kind of misunderstanding on the part of Pakistani leadership that Kashmiris, they are since majority Muslim, so they will join Pakistan. So it was kind of a misunderstanding on their part, and Jinnah said that Kashmir will fall in my lap like a ready apple. It will just be ready thing and Kashmir will join us. But here, Kashmiris, they refused to join Pakistan. It was very frustrating for Jinnah and the Pakistani leadership. So what they decide? They decide to occupy Kashmir by force. But at that time, the military was controlled by one British general. He was the chief of the general, the military, and he refused to put his armies from Pakistan and India against each other. So Pakistan could not use this army, they decided to use mercenaries, like in Afghan war in 80s and even later on in 90s. They recruited many Afghans from one part of Pakistan and they sent it to Kashmir with some civilian help from Pakistan as well, but the leadership was mainly the Pakistan military. And they could capture up to this green part. You can see this part was very fast captured by Pakistani mercenaries and military. And that time, Raja didn't have a strong army because during the British Raj, when they were prisoner state, they didn't need to have big armies because the defense was the responsibility of the British imperialism. Though he had no option, so he contacts Nehru in Delhi. Look, Pakistan is capturing, can you help? Well, Nehru was already ready to get an excuse reaching Kashmir. Well, I can help, says Nehru, but you will have to sign an agreement that Kashmir will become part of India. Well, it's a big debate in the history of Kashmir if he agreed or if he didn't agree. But there is no historical proof that ever there was any written agreement between India and Kashmir that Kashmir is joining India. But Nehru sent his armies. They could stop Pakistani invasion on these lines, which is called ceasefire line, and later on line of control. And since then, India has never gone back. They stayed there. Instead, in 1948, India went to United Nations for a ceasefire of the war, and the decision was, okay, United Nations will organize a plebiscite, a referendum in Kashmir, and the Kashmiri people will decide if they want to join India, if they want to join Pakistan, or they want to be independent. But even today, the referendum has not been held. And over 60 years, a very strong nationalist movement has been going on in Kashmir for the independence of Kashmir. And actually, the movement for the liberation had started before 1947. The problem was, the king, he belonged to, and can we go back to the old map? Here. The king belonged to Jammu, and Kashmir, this Gilgit-Baltistan, Ladakh, these were three different regions which were captured by, or bought. Kashmir was actually bought by the king of Jammu from Britishers. So there was a kind of apartheid in this state. The dynasty coming from Jammu, it was a Hindu dynasty. An upper caste Hindu family was ruling the whole this kingdom, and they were especially quite anti-Muslim and anti-Kashmiri. The Kashmiris didn't have rights as the people from Jammu had. So they started a very big movement for the rights of Kashmiris in late 1920s, early 1930s, and mainly it was the youth which went to Lahore, to Delhi, to Aligarh, another big institution of learning at that time. They got influence from this youth got influence from the ideas of communism, from the ideas of non-violence of Mahatma Gandhi. They came in contact with Nehru. So this was the influence that Sheikh Abdullah, which we saw before, he started and his comrades started the Jammu Kashmir National Front, which was a very radical nationalist party, although not a communist, but they were quite close to the communist of India. And after the independence was achieved by India and the problem started, so Sheikh Abdullah was appointed as a Prime Minister of Indian occupied Kashmir. And also he was very close to Nehru. Abdullah himself was a kind of social revolutionary, a copy of Nehru, you can say. Nehru himself was a social revolutionary, very close to socialist ideas, but kind of mix who could never decide if he's a socialist or not. Under the influence of communists, under the influence of the whole movement in India, Abdullah introduced very progressive reforms. Feudalism was abolished in Indian occupied Kashmir. A lot of progressive reforms were introduced. At that time, interestingly, the father of former US State Secretary Madeleine Albright, her father was in Kashmir as UN representative, and he wrote a book, Danger in Kashmir, that Kashmir is going to communist. But the communists, they were well divided about Sheikh Abdullah, and some of them thought he is very close to India. Those who were the Muslims and those who were Hindus, they thought, no, it's going good. And actually, I think this will be the only communist party in the world which divided along religious lines. There was a split, Hindu-Muslim split in the Communist Party, but that's another story. Anyway, the Congress government in India, it never trusted Kashmiris, despite a lull in the struggle soon afterwards when independence was achieved by India. From 47 up to 51, 53, there was a lull in the struggle because the Kashmiri leadership was expecting Nehru and Pakistani governments to hold a plebiscite in Kashmir. Also, there was a UN resolution, UN had decided, but nothing happens. People start getting uneasy, and Sheikh Abdullah wants Nehru and reminds him in big public meetings. There was a big agitation. He reminds Nehru, well, Mr. Nehru, you had promised a referendum. Don't forget your promise. And Nehru starts getting uneasy. Instead, he arrests Sheikh Abdullah and puts him in jail, and he had to stay in jail most of the time up to 1976. Meantime, when he was in jail, after 4 years, Nehru thought, okay, maybe Abdullah is not popular anymore. I bring him out. He brings him out, and 1 million people come out to welcome Sheikh Abdullah. Nehru gets uneasy again, puts him in jail again. But as the time passes, in 60s, we had revolutionary movements in whole of third world, especially. You had Cuban Revolution, you had revolutions and national revolution struggles in Africa. Especially Algeria had big effect in Muslim world, and especially some youth in Kashmir. They got big influence from the freedom struggle in Algiers. One of them was Mahmoud Bak, who was uneasy with the politics of Sheikh Abdullah. He thought that his non-violence and this parliamentary politics is leading us nowhere. He and his friends, they formed a small group at that time, 1968, 69. They were pretty radical on economic issues, but mainly they were kind of, you can say, bourgeois national radicals who wanted independence of Kashmir through guerrilla struggle. And in fact, they were very influenced by Che Guevara. They started some guerrilla activities. Makbul was arrested in 1970. There was a general strike. There was total boycott of the elections in Kashmir. Actually, the 88 movement started as a protest against an election. India tried to hold an election which was boycotted. Hardly 2 or 3% of the voters voted. But still, India manages to impose a government in Kashmir, a so-called elected government, and people rejected.
Which year was that?
1988. And there is a big demonstrations, general strikes, and Kashmir was totally out of Indian control. And then it starts sending army. Since then, we have over 500,000 Indian military troops. To be exact, they say 700,000 military troops from Indian side in this part of Kashmir. So these are the pictures from 1988 when there was bombings, there were killings, there were raids, there was house searches, women were kidnapped, thousands have been missing since then, tortures in jails, and the movement started in 88, it went down in 94, 95, but keep going up to now. as Arif said, figures are up to 80,000. The Kashmiri says it is up to 80,000 deaths in Kashmir, in Indian occupied Kashmir. And independent media, so-called independent media from all across the world, they put it up to 40,000 and 60,000. There are different figures. But, I mean, in 90s and onwards, if anything that has grown in Kashmir, that was graveyards. And Tariq Ali, in his recent book, Clash of Fundamentalism, he correctly writes that it's the breeze of death that blows in Kashmir. That's all. It's a total tragedy, but the tragedy was created mainly by Pakistan. And a big mistake, I think, in my view, the big mistake committed by JKLF at that time in 1988, when they went to Pakistan military for help against Indian occupation. Pakistan was very happy to help because they wanted to engage Indian army. And meantime, the Afghan war was over, 1990. There was 25,000 at that time, 25,000 guerrillas from all across the Muslim world who were sent to Afghanistan by Pakistan with CIA and Saudi money and all that. People know a lot about that. Muslim countries were not ready to take back their guerrillas. Egypt was not ready, Algeria was not ready, Saudi was not ready, nobody was ready. 25,000 end up in Pakistan. Pakistan had to do something with that. So they thought, okay, send them to Kashmir. And the way we engaged Soviet army in Afghanistan, and we could bleed Soviet Union, we can do the same thing in Kashmir. Now we have long experience from Afghanistan. But this was the most tragic part of the struggle. These fundamentalists, these militants who went to Kashmir, they just didn't bring guns to Kashmir. They also brought Islamic ideas to Kashmir. The Talibanization that started in Afghanistan in 1997, they tried to impose it in Kashmir 1992-93. And they were given another task. Because the secular JKLF, the democratic forces of Kashmir, the secular forces of Kashmir, which wanted independence and which wanted an independent Kashmir, were not acceptable to Pakistan authorities. The first task these militants did was to kill the forces of JKLF, no matter if they were guerrillas or political workers. They killed professors, they killed artists. There was a whole kind of campaign which went on in Algeria by the militants in early 90s. They burned down cinema houses, they imposed hijab, sloya on women in Kashmir. And Kashmir, especially Kashmir, is part of Indian subcontinent, if you consider it part of Indian subcontinent, because we think it's more influence of Central Asia. It's been traditionally very secular, very independent. It's pretty different from rest of the Indian subcontinent. The influence of old Buddha religion, the old Hindu religion, it stays. It stays in many positive forms. And except in 1947, we never had this Hindu-Muslim problem, or Hindu-Buddha or Buddha-Muslim problem. At least in the 20th century. In history we had, but under the influence of this party at a national conference, the secular culture was very strong. And the fundamentalists, they tried to break this culture. This infighting between fundamentalists and JKLF, I think in the period from 94 to 95, they killed each other in a big number than they were killed by the Indian military. And once I met the leader of JKLF, the party of Old Bat, and his leader told me horror stories how they were killing each other. And later on, as more fundamentalists, they were being produced from Afghanistan in connection with Pakistan military. They were sent to Kashmir. For instance, Saudi Arabia wanted Wahhabi group to be sent to Kashmir so that they can create a Wahhabi state in Kashmir. different sects of Pakistan military. They wanted their own ideas. So it was a number of militant groups which were sent to Kashmir. They were fighting each other as well. And as a result, the Kashmiri people, they were disillusioned in many ways on one hand, and then it was a lot of bloodshed that led to a lull in the struggle. The struggle went down. But last few years, the struggle has taken new shapes. Now people are more for demonstrations, more for kind of intifada struggle. The intifada style struggle is there. Not the second intifada in Palestine, but the first intifada. It's not totally non-violent as Gandhi would have it, but it's pretty kind of civil disobedience movement. And the thing is, the Kashmir problem is not just a border dispute or something that India and Pakistan want to be there. The China and the US imperialism, they are pretty much involved in question as well. And one thing everybody is agreed upon: Pakistan, India, China, and to a big extent USA, everybody wants a status quo. Nobody wants a solution to this problem. The reason is very simple. India and Pakistan, they maintain very big militaries. India spends 33% of its annual budget on military. Pakistan spends almost 40% of its budget on defense. And the only reason that they tell to their people, both in India and Pakistan, it's Kashmir. Look, Pakistan says, if we do not have a big military in Kashmir, India will take it over. And they are raping our Muslim sisters in Kashmir, they are killing our Muslim brothers in Kashmir, and they never tell, okay, it was your bastards sent from Afghanistan who killed many Muslims more than the Indians. Same thing in India. Okay, Kashmir was legally joined by the Kashmir king, and it's our legal right to have Kashmir, and if we do not have big army, Pakistan will take it over. In this nonsense campaign, they have fought 3 wars, and actually 4. First war was fought, as Arif told before, 1947-48. Second war was 1965, when again there was a big civil disobedience movement led by Sheikh Abdullah and his party, and Pakistan thought, okay, people are unhappy with India, so we will send our guerrillas, and guerrillas will be given big support and Kashmir will be part of Pakistan. It didn't happen because people were not ready to join Pakistan. Again, 1998, this present Pakistani general and dictator, Musharraf, who is pretty popular among the Western media, he started a war in Kashmir. Then he was not president but chief of the military. Again a bloody war. And then there was another war which has went on for almost 20 years. It's called Siachen War. There is a very big glacier, and they say it's the biggest glacier in the world, where the temperature remains between -50 up to -70. Even, no life exists there, but military and strategically it's very important both for Pakistan and India as well as China, because who holds this point holds strategic points, and especially if China needs land link with Pakistan, it can be cut off from Siachen. That's the importance of this point. A war is going on there. Hundreds, rather thousands have been dead from both sides. And just one day, it is costing millions of rupees both to India and Pakistan. War is going on. Even people in India and Pakistan, they don't know much about it. Western media hardly writes about it. And the war is going on in the name of Kashmir. And they call it, it's very high point as well, they call it a war on the top of the world. It is going very much unnoticed. And the other factor that why these forces internationally don't want a solution to Kashmir. China is afraid that USA will take over Kashmir if it becomes independent. China doesn't want another Taiwan on its borders. China is afraid, okay, if Kashmir becomes independent, I will lose my land contact with Pakistan, because there exists Kashmir between Pakistan and China. And very cleverly, Pakistan has detached that part from Kashmir. It is called northern areas of Pakistan. They have given it another name just to show it's part of Pakistan, but it's not part of Pakistan. And then comes the weapons industry. From Sweden to England, from England to France, from France to USA, they have to sell weapons to India, to Pakistan, and especially Swedish weapons, they are used in Kashmir. The guns sent by Bofors. And a few months ago, by end of last year, in December and in January, I was in Kashmir. And my special focus was to do a story on the victims of Bofors guns, on line of control. And line of control is a kind of Berlin Wall. It goes across Kashmir, it divides Kashmir between India and Pakistan, controlled parts of Kashmir. It's over 700 kilometers, and it's very funny control line. I mean, there is a village, half of is on this side, other half is on this side. One brothers live on this side, the sister lives on the other side. They cannot meet. And sometimes, do you have these pictures where they're meeting? Yeah, this is how they meet. I mean, they have a rope, they're sending gifts to each other. It was a Muslim Christmas perhaps, so they must exchange gifts. Next. There is a woman writing a letter to her brother on the other side. Some relatives sending some gift to his friends or relatives on the other side. And very often, just to scare these people. And especially in March, when India has its budget, annual budget, and in June, when Pakistan has its annual budget, they just start unprovoked shelling, a very big shelling. They just start shelling for days and days. This is just to give an impression to their people. For instance, Pakistan starts shelling and says in June, says, look, there is a war going on in Kashmir, so we need 40% on our military. Same thing is done by India in March, and it's Kashmiris who get killed on both sides. Whoever uses guns, it's Kashmiris who get killed. And I would just keep myself here up to Sweden and Bofors. Sweden started selling weapons to both India and Pakistan in 1947. The first time Pakistan bought its weapon from Sweden was 1948. It was some AFF or AFA, something like that, a Swedish company that sold weapons to Pakistan. By 1960s, India had become the biggest buyer of Swedish weapons in third world. Same was the case in 1970s. Same was the case in 1980s, when great Swedish leader and Prime Minister Olof Palme, a friend of the third world, goes to India in 1986, meets another great Indian Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi. They say it was a kickback of over $1 billion. A deal was done. India bought Bofors. $100 million ended up perhaps in Rajiv Gandhi's or his wife's accounts. Well, Palme was perhaps not interested in kickbacks, but he wanted to save some jobs in Bofors. Election was perhaps close in Sweden at that time. It was few hundred or perhaps few thousand jobs. But since then, Bofors has been used all across Kashmir control line, and thousands have been victim of this Bofors. And here are some figures. You can just imagine the amount India and Pakistan have sent to Sweden in the name of weapon, purchase of weapons. 41 million crowns in the 60s. This is just India, because Pakistan is not a very big 334 million crowns in 70s, at the end of 70s. 80s, it becomes, when Bofors was there, 7,480 million crowns. Then it was a very big corruption scandal. The scandal was like the biggest ever we have in Indian subcontinent. I mean, everybody knows almost in India and some parts of towns of Pakistan. Bofors, the word Bofors is very popular there. So the figures went down, and it was a big scandal in the 90s, but still at the end of the 90s, India had bought weapons worth over 1,709 million crowns. I also met a family which was a victim of Bofors. These guns, it's an area called Chikoti, which is one of the main victim of Bofors. And since I've been talking a lot about the oppression of Indians in Indian occupied Kashmir, I mean, Pakistan is not very nice to Kashmiris. Oppression is quite big in Pakistani occupied control as well, but not it never went to the extent as it went in Indian occupied Kashmir. But the political repression is very high. Any party that stands for the freedom of Kashmir is illegal. They cannot take part in elections. Media is not independent. Going to these areas, even for Pakistani journalists, it's very difficult. And for foreigners, well, out of question. Only sometimes military brings its own foreign correspondents as guests and show these areas just as a propaganda measure against Indians. So I went to this area, and not because I was a foreign or a Pakistani journalist, but well, I managed. I had some links and the military. And funny thing is, in Indian occupied Kashmir, for the last since '88, journalists are simply not allowed. My friend Marco, who's there, he went there as a tourist, and he can tell you many stories how he was harassed despite he was a tourist. And as a Pakistani passport holder, I cannot go to that part either. Arif was telling another funny joke the other day. He met the Indian ambassador here one day, and he said, "I want to see you in the embassy tomorrow." Why? He asked. Well, I want to get Indian passport. But you have Pakistani passport and you come from Pakistan, Pakistani occupied Kashmir. Yes, but you people claim that Kashmir is part of India. And I'm Kashmiri, why don't you give me a passport? But he had no answer. Anyway, I went to that area, and this is a high school in Chikoti, a victim of Bofors. Some more pictures maybe of this school. No, this is the same flag, Kashmiri flag. This is a classroom in that school. Another photo from the same school. There is more. Yeah. School was totally destroyed. When I went there, it was almost 0 degrees. Very cold, very cold. Students were sitting outside, having their lectures. The only school in this, it's kind of grundskola. High school is called, it's equivalent to grundskola here in Sweden. There was a hospital in front of it, which I could not take pictures on because it had been repaired meantime. It was totally destroyed. Students, this is a classroom for children. They are sitting actually in a classroom which is more like a trench. It should be like this, for the fear of Bofors shelling. Then I met a guy whose name was Abbasi. His shops, owned by his family, they have been destroyed. And when your house is destroyed or your shop is destroyed, the Pakistani government or the so-called Kashmir government, it pays only 3,000 rupees or 5,000 for the house. How much it will be in Swedish crowns? Hardly 500 crowns. I mean, you can't build a shop like this in 500 crowns in Pakistan. It costs at least 4,000 crowns to build this shop. But he lost his shops. But more than that, he lost his wife in Bofors shelling once. And there he's with his wife's grave. this daughter, when this woman was killed, she was only 9 months. There was a Swedish journalist, they told me, there. And he was rather trying to find out that, no, she was not a victim of Bofors. She was perhaps killed by, it was perhaps some kind of honor killing. Perhaps there was some family dispute. It was a killing in that regard. But even kids know when it's Bofors shelling. I had an interview on my tape recorder, which I will bring it out, it's in Urdu. I asked kids there, do you know the word Bofors? Yes, we do. Do you know it comes from Sweden? Well, that they didn't know. Do you know what Sweden or where Sweden is? That perhaps they didn't know either. But Bofors, they knew. Because when it's shelling with Bofors, it has a typical sound. It's different from other shelling. It's different from other guns. And this Swedish journalist, I don't know which newspaper he belonged to, he was trying to tell them, no, it was not Bofors, it was something else. Anyway, the thing is, as a result of Bofors and all the arms sale to India and Pakistan, the Swedish ruling class has blood on its hand. And I think most of the Swedish people don't know about that. I think those we are here, especially the members of Swedish Kashmir Committee, we're trying to inform them and get their support for our rights struggle, for our rights, for our liberation, and hope this meeting will prove a big win. Thank you very much.
I have 3 questions. Can I ask you?
Yeah, So, any questions?
You can come. I think that personally, I do not agree with all the discussion that you have made. Actually, I belong to that area. I live in as close to very close to Kashmir, and I have gone through the history of the Kashmir, the problem and everything. And the first thing that is conflicting in your discussion is about the independence. That you say that the Kashmir remained an independent country or something or state for a few months. But if you look to the agreement that was made at the during the British Empire, that they made that this continent will be divided into 2 parts: the Hindu majority area and the Muslim majority area. There was no any other kind of any that some state they can stay independent or something like that. And then you said that the National Conference was the most popular political party at that time in Kashmir. Then why that party joined Kashmir, joined India, and they are still ruling there, and they have not raised the question for independence of Kashmir because they were popular. My second question is that I think that right now we have 3 big groups in India and Pakistan. One is pro-Pakistani group, one is pro-Indian group, and one is in middle, those who want independence. And what we see that those people who want independence, they emerged during the 80s. They never existed before this. So, in your discussion, of course, it was some sort of more towards Pakistan. You focused more on Pakistan rather than going towards India. If you had balance between both countries, then how is the political system going on both in India and Pakistan? If Pakistan has banned those groups who want independence, just independence from both countries, what is the situation in India? Does India allow such groups? Or India just there?
May I answer now?
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's the problem with Pakistanis and Indians as well. The word of independent Kashmir is
it's not something very bad. Of course, they have the right. I think this is their right to ask for the independence. But the question is that whether this is the true picture. Whether this is the true picture, or these are the only people who represent more than 10%.
You have 2 questions. In the first place, the question was, you think it never happened in British plans that princely states could go independent.
Yes.
The problem is not with British plans or my report. The problem is with the history taught in Pakistani schools.
If you have any reference, I will very happy to see that reference. If you can show that the British they were planning to have an independent state in that region.
Can you bring my bag, please? Maybe I have a book
You
here.
have to, I mean, I think what was nice is you were showing the references in your presentation.
Yes, I mean that was not possible. That was not possible. But it's a historical fact that princely states were given the right. Because of that right, they teach in Pakistani schools that Junagadh and Hyderabad belong to Pakistan. Okay. So the same right was given to Kashmir as well. And the Kashmir problem started in October basically. And at that time, National Conference, it wanted independent Kashmir. Muslim Conference, which is now led by Sardar Qayyum and his children and so on. It was for, at that time, the president of Muslim Conference was Chaudhry Abdul Hamid. And he was a close friend of, and a class fellow of my grandfather. And my grandfather was one of the founders of Muslim Conference. And there are very clear resolutions by Muslim Conference and agreed by Jinnah that we support independence of Kashmir.
Okay, let me reply. If you allow me. Your question regarding the option of Kashmir to be an independent state, I will just focus on facts. If you see, when there was an election in 46 in India, so first we should try to understand the Indian political position in 1946. India was two types of governments. First was the British India, ruled directly by the British. So that was, for example, Punjab, Bengal and these. That was directly under the British government. And there was the elections in 46, where the Muslim League won in the Muslim majority provinces and the Congress in the others. The other 563 states, which we are talking about, they were the Indian Indias. They were not the British India. And there were no elections. There were no the foundation of Muslim League or Indian Congress. For example, Hyderabad, for example, Junagadh, for example, Kashmir. In Kashmir, there was no Muslim League. There was no Congress. And these states, the Indian states, in the it was the 3rd June 1947 when the British they declared to divide India into two states. If you read the text of 3rd June plan, I think you can't, you are not able to put the question. In 3rd June, the plan, it was the Muslim majorities will go to Pakistan, Indian majority will go to India. The Indian states, the Desi states, have the option to join India or Pakistan, or they can to be independent states. That Mountbatten declared. Then, all the states, they were going to decide their future. And secondly, the mostly Indian and Pakistani students, as they read the history by the Indian and Pakistani government, what they wanted to teach them. Secondly, the Indians, the states, this state will jointly, whole state will go to India or Pakistan as independent, and state will not be, the option of Indian and Muslim majority will not be valid on the future of the state. So, most of the states did decide. For example, and the 14th August 1947, people believe that there were two independent countries. As I told in my Swedish lecture, there were three states: Pakistan, India, and Hyderabad. Hyderabad declares independence. Pakistan accepted independence of Hyderabad. And yes, please let me finish. And there was Mushtaq Ahmed, ambassador of Hyderabad, and they had their embassy at 7 Clifton at Karachi. And the book written by Mushtaq Ahmed, the ambassador of India, that is available in Halunda Library in Urdu. You can get that book, you can read. And he has written the strategy of Hyderabad. Hyderabad remained more than 1 year an independent country. Hyderabad had the embassy at Islamabad and Karachi, Delhi, and London. And when the Jinnah was died, that Indian at the time, they occupied Hyderabad. So, and then both parties, Muslim League, they declared clearly, Liaquat Ali Khan, the Secretary General of Muslim League, in 30th April 1947, he declared that if Kashmir want to be independent, we will respect that. And Jinnah, in 30th July 1947, in Pakistan time, I have that newspaper, I can show the photocopy of that newspaper. The headline, the option not limited to India or Pakistan, states can to be choose independent. And Jinnah said, that's why the Jinnah didn't say that India, Kashmir should become Pakistan. He said, I respect, because there was one proposal that Pakistan should lose the Hyderabad and India can lose the Kashmir. But Jinnah said, no, I am a democratic person. I am not going to bother the people. I am not going to involve in this business. And then Junagadh was the one state, and the majority were Hindus. And Junagadh decided to join the Pakistan, and Jinnah accepted. And Jinnah did not say that according to two-nation theory, Junagadh should go to India. And when I was student, and up to 80 in our map, they showed Junagadh in our Pakistan and India capture. So first you should note these two principles: 3rd June 1947 plan, and then the position of India politically. That was British India and Indian India. If you have some more questions, you can discuss that.
The thing is, okay, I am for independent Kashmir for 3 generations. Okay, have a referendum there. Let's decide.
That's what the question is. Who is denying that?
Pakistan and India denying that.
So that's the question. How to solve this? I mean, this is the most important thing. I mean, on the Pakistan side, if the Pakistan is denying, because in the media, the Pakistani government, they say that we accept this referendum, we allow under the United Nations. Pakistan never denied at the government level.
Yes, Pakistan.
By your part, I'm
Pakistan and media also says that
Pakistan cannot deny this at United Nations level, because Pakistan is always is concerned about this, that we are ready to have referendum under the United Nations Charter. But it's India that's denying.
I mean, that's you are right at this point.
Okay.
So you are wrong.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong. But let's take Pakistan now its army. Why not?
Okay,
and Pakistani media always.
How is the ratio between Pakistani army and Indian
Okay.
army?
Well, I think we can have a debate if it goes on like this. There are more questions. Yes, you had a question.
No, I was just thinking when I heard this former discussion that, I think that history is interesting in many ways. It can explain a lot, but history is rarely a part of the solution. If we want a solution today, we have to forget about history. Otherwise, we will just be stuck in this discussion about Ali Jinnah and Congress and whatever, how he's seen and what he did and what he didn't do and all that. But today we have a conflict between India and Pakistan and the Kashmiris, about Kashmir, and what to do about it. I mean, and I think each time has its own solution. Maybe if somebody had forced a solution in the 60s, maybe the line of control would have been the thing. But today it's not anymore. So what is the solution today? Because the solution must have two qualities. One is that it has to be acceptable to all concerned parties. They don't need to like it, but they must be able to live with it. That's two different things. You must be able to live with it. That is India and Pakistan, and to a certain extent China. Secondly, it must also be acceptable to the people of Kashmir. Not that they necessarily will be very, very happy about it, but it should be acceptable and they grudgingly have to agree to it. All these parties have to grudgingly agree to it. So, what is the solution today?
The solution is, from the beginning, very simple. Let Kashmiri people decide. Let's have a referendum there.
No.
That's
It's not the solution.
Not me. Well, everybody has it.
But that's what everybody says, because we are so democratic, and
Yeah.
it's very easy to say, and it's a nice idea
Yeah.
to say that, but it won't happen.
There is a UN resolution from 1948.
I know that.
So let us implement it.
But you
This
should
is
not
what
be,
I think.
if anybody should be against that, because contrary to what you have said here twice, the UN resolution doesn't include independence. It's only India or Pakistan.
No,
Yes.
the original includes.
Yes.
It was modified.
No, it's not.
No,
No, sorry. I'm sorry to say this because you're a nice chap.
The resolution was modified. It was modified on the intervention of Pakistan later on, and the option was removed.
But the
original
resolution is The resolution is whether what happened before the resolution.
These are
Once it is accepted, the resolution is only India or Pakistan. It's not independence.
The thing is,
Unfortunately.
the Kashmir history is often officially spread by India and Pakistan. Please ask us as well. We have some historians as well.
No.
We have written some history as well.
Look, ask the United Nations. Is there a resolution?
Okay.
And there you
But
can see.
it's a matter of debate, so everybody has a...
No, I have read the resolution. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me here. I have it
Okay,
at home. I have read it.
unfortunately,
But again
I
now,
don't have that book now. There is a whole book produced by Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front on the resolutions from 1948 up to now.
Yes.
So, if you contact me later on, we can erase that.
But again, now, we get stuck in history.
Yes.
Because the United States, the UN resolution was adopted in 1948.
Yeah.
It's history. It's more than 50 years.
Yeah.
You and I, we were born in, you know. so that's also history. What can we do today to solve the Kashmir problem? Now you say independence, you say a referendum. Referendum, independence, I feel you have the right to independence, of course. But look, India wouldn't accept it. Pakistan wouldn't accept it. China wouldn't accept it.
But what about us? I mean, we're people of Kashmir.
Well,
We want independence.
you have to read Mao Zedong's dictum, the political power comes out of the barrel of a gun and you don't have enough guns. And you don't use it the right way.
Well,
So, I agree with
it's
you.
like,
I agree.
it's like Mao's great teachings.
No, but I agree. But I think that
We want independence.
you have to be realistic. Today, 50 years ahead, maybe it's different. Who believed 10 years ago, 20 years ago that the Baltic states would be independent?
Well, it was pretty unrealistic, many other things.
It was.
So,
It was. So, but today, when we look at it, it's unrealistic. Maybe not tomorrow, but today it's unrealistic. So I don't know what solution do you have? If you say plebiscite, you see, when people talk about plebiscites, I get the impression that it's basically in the Indian part of Kashmir they have to hold it. Because to imagine that Pakistan, in their part of Kashmir, the whole Kashmir that you showed on the map, would allow a plebiscite where people would vote, let's go to India, let's continue with Pakistan, let's have independence, forget it.
okay.
It could happen in India in future, but never in Pakistan.
Okay.
Forget it.
Perhaps people know very, very, very little because of strong media censorship about the nationalistic movement here in this green area, Gilgit-Baltistan. And interestingly, it is one of the strong left movements in present-day Pakistan. It is often very much suppressed, also because of China. And the followers of Comrade Mao, they are, I'm sorry to say, very unfriendly to the, go back to the map, to the people of left and people of that area in this green area. And before Mao, I think it was Comrade Lenin who said that we should respect the right of self-determination of all the oppressed nationalities. And for me, I think that is more important. Whether or not it is reliable or achievable or not. Well, any other question? Yes?
I've been hearing all the discussion that's been going on. It's my personal viewpoint is, it's very easy when we sit on the chairs in the audience and comment. It's very difficult to stand on that position like that speaker is standing and talking.